What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Tomatolito Boxing Show. I'm Heck Cali, your host, and thank you so much for joining me and for accompanying me on this evening. We are just a few days removed from the big weekend and the big event, two big fights, and I'm going to dedicate an episode to each. I'm actually going to do several episodes based on this weekend because there was some amazing fights and some big fights that ended up shaking up their rankings in their respective divisions. So we're gonna do right by these fighters, and we're gonna cover, give them the necessary time, and we're gonna start with the biggest event, in my opinion, stateside, which was took place in Las Vegas, Nevada, and that was between the Mexican monster La Bandera Roja, David Benavidez, versus Demetrius Andrade, Boo Boo Andrade. Self-proclaimed most avoided fighter. People started running off with that narrative when he was at 160, but it all started with him, the self-proclaimed most avoided fighter. And well, he was always fighting lesser opposition. He was, in his opinion, he was fighting the only ones that would step up to him, but we never saw him really take on any major challenges. And so he was outshining. He was outshining his opposition to date. And this was his biggest challenge. He moved up. He vacated his title. Of course, the champion, the champion standing that took over his title is Janibek. And Janibek is running that division now, 160 with two titles. He's the only standing unified champion. Gennady Golovkin seems to have stepped away from the game. We haven't received an official retirement from Gennady Golovkin that I've seen yet as of this episode, but I know he vacated his titles, meaning Erislandy Lara is the only champ at WBA that the WBA has at 160, and Jermall Charlo is the current champion. He's been the champion in recess for the WBC at 160 for well over a year since his fight with Montiel. Of course, he was on the undercard of this fight, and I'm going to dedicate an episode to that because it shook up a little bit. There was quite a bit of movement there with his return and quite a bit that could take place with him. So we'll dedicate an episode to him. And of course, he was fighting David's older brother, Jose Benavidez Jr., Again, it was not a title fight, but we'll talk about that. We'll give them their respect, and we'll talk about that. But the main event, is what we need to get to. 160, Janibek has two titles. Adames is the interim for the WBC. Jermall is still the WBC champ at 160, and Erislandy Lara has the WBA title now that Gennady stepped away. That's how the 160 looks since Andrade left. Boo Boo Andrade vacates, moves up, vacated the WBO title. He moves up, and then he challenges at 168. He wanted CANELO. He wanted the payday, just like CANELO said, right? Payday, payday. That famous meme that came about that press conference encounter that they had between Boo Boo and his father as CANELO finished his fight. Who did he finish? Caleb Plant? Was it after he beat Caleb Plant that took place? Must have been. It was either after Caleb Plant or BJ Saunders, one of those fights that he ended up interfering or interrupting his press conference. Nonetheless, that became a famous meme. Boo Boo became the self-proclaimed most avoided fighter at 160 and most avoided fighter in boxing. And then people started running off with that narrative just to create a narrative and to get under Canelo's skin, and that he's avoiding fighting the undefeated Andrade. And then we had whatever. I mean, that took a life of its own, right? But here it is. Let's look at his resume. Leading into this fight, he fought Damon Nicholson, Jason Quigley, Liam Williams, Luke Keeler, Maciej Sulecki, which is possibly the best one of those opponents. Damon Nicholson's pretty decent. But Jason Quigley, of course, Liam Williams, Luke Keeler, Arthur Akavov, Walter Kauton Dokwa, Alante Svax, decent fighter, Jack Kolke, Willie Nelson, Dario Fabian Pucheta. I mean, come on, guys. If we're going to run down this resume, are you really going to be able to tell me? So here, I'll tell you the names that stand out to me from his resume. Dating back to, let's see, when he was coming up, dating back to August of 2011, Grady Brewer. Then from there, January of 2013, Freddie Hernandez. It's 2023. January of 2013, Freddie Hernandez. November of 2013, Vanes Matarosian. From there, 2014, June of 2014, look at those pauses, 6-7 months in between. Brian Rose, English fighter Brian Rose. From there, Bucheta, Willie Nelson, Jack Colque, Alantes Fox was a decent competition, but Alantes Fox, of course, 154. He stayed at 154 pounds. Tall fighter, lanky fighter, long reach. He lost by unanimous decision to Demetrius Andrade. That happened in 2017. I mean, look at the span that we're talking about, his resume. Then it was Artur Akovov, Maciej Sulecki, 2019, June of 2019. Maciej Sulecki, of course, fought Charlo as well. And has been involved in very good fights. Very good fighter, very solid fighter. That, to me, would be the best fighter he has on his resume until this past Saturday. Luke Keeler, that was in January of 2020. Liam Williams, April of 21. If you remember that fight, Liam Williams, actually, that was a bloody fight. Liam Williams was bloodied up quite a bit. And it was a tough fight for Andrade. It was like a rough and tumble, really a lot of dirty boxing, a lot of clinching, a lot of rope work. He gave him a tough fight. But still, he ended up winning by unanimous decision. Then Jason Quigley, Damon Nicholson, and which was at the beginning of this year, January 7th of this year of 2023. That was Damon Nicholson. But before Damon Nicholson, Andrade had not fought since 2021. Just think about that. November of 21 is when he fought Jason Quigley. He took all 2022 off and came back January of 23, earlier this year, Damon Nicholson, and then he takes the majority of the year off. So a lot of inactivity. Meanwhile, he's talking about being avoided, meanwhile this, meanwhile that, and the narrative keeps going, and the most avoided fighter and the most this, and he keeps trying to talk himself into fights. But that inactivity, obviously, we have to look at that as something that has affected Boo Boo Andrade, because he's been inactive, and look at the span that we just covered from 2013, 10 years ago, until this big fight, this big mega fight that he got himself into against David Benavidez, and he was stopped. Those of you that got to see the fight, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you that didn't, then let me just tell you what, in a brief summary, what just happened. Let's recap this. Round one, and even round two, I could give to Demetrius Andrade. He starts with a lot of energy. He was putting really good combinations together, really good combinations to the body, and really good combinations to the head. Good protection, good defense by David Benavidez on both rounds, but Demetrius Andrade looked like he was doing some good work. Every so often, Benavidez would let go of his hands, throw a big hook or a big power punch, which is what Benavidez is doing nowadays, just big power punches, and continue to walk forward. He was getting peppered a little bit, but nothing that would be alarming to anybody. Nothing that was alarming to us to be like, wow, Andrade is really hurting Benavidez. It wasn't. It was just a lot of good work that Andrade was doing, and Boo Boo was warming up. So putting those combinations and throwing punches and bunches, but actually being efficient and accurate, was actually making him look good, because he was warming into the fight and getting himself into the fight, trying to find a pace and trying to set his pace. Of course, by round three, Benavidez started moving in. He starts landing some heavy body shots, heavy hooks, and heavy head hunting that Benavidez is doing. He starts deteriorating Andrade. By round four, Andrade continues his body of work, but is starting to duck his head a lot more, and Benavidez is starting to find the uppercuts, and find the head by way of uppercuts, and find the ribs. He starts shaking up Andrade. By round four, he drops Andrade. And it was a nasty right hook, such a hard power right hook that David Benavidez threw, that even though Andrade blocked it, It hurt. It went through his gloves and damaged them that much that even though he was blocking his head and he was protecting his face, it was such a hard punch that it still shook him, swinging down to the right of his body. And Benavidez ends up coming out with another one, which his forearm ends up landing on the top left shoulder of Andrade as he's leaning down right, and ends up falling, stumbling down, falls on his knees, gloves down, face down, and he was shook. And that is where the downfall of Andrade came about. He was getting hit, and the few punches, even though he threw quite a bit more than Benavidez's punching power was the big difference. It was the difference maker. And we knew that was going to be it because he did it to Caleb Plant. He continues to walk forward. Caleb Plant put up a really valiant fight, a really good effort. And he was actually looking like he was going to walk away with that fight. And we all knew it earlier in the year. We all knew that if Caleb Plant had a chance, he had to box and outbox because he had done that to Canelo. And he was winning, in my opinion. He could have very well been winning that fight. Canelo had some really good rounds, but Caleb was outboxing him and he was doing really good as the body punching and the body shots continue to accumulate on the way of Canelo, or by Canelo, to Plant. Plant started deteriorating. So he started moving around a lot more. He started circling the ring, getting on the bicycle, and of course, eventually it caught up to him. This is exactly what Benavidez is doing right now. He's hunting. He's not just head hunting, but he's hunting them down. He doesn't stop. He smothers the opponents, and he did it to Caleb Plant, and he did it to Andrade once again. This is his style now. He's walking down. He's walking forward. He's no longer standing in the ring trying to stand and bang. He's no longer looking to exchange. He's just starting to walk, and this is what he's been doing for the last few fights now. He's not looking to get on the back foot. He's not looking to take a back step. He's not used to it. It's uncomfortable for him. He's just going to walk forward, walk through the punches, deal with it, toughen up, and continue to walk the opponents down and chase, walk forward. And he smothers them to the point where he eventually tires them out and add the punching power to it. And he deteriorates his opponents. And he did it to Andrade. Very valiant effort by Andrade in the 5th round, where now he was just in there by heart. His spirit was keeping him in, but he had nothing to offer anymore. You could see it in the 5th round, and you could see it in the 6th, that he was just beat up, swollen, bloodied, and he had nothing left, but he just didn't want to go out that way. He didn't want to go out that way. He wanted to go out on a shield, and he didn't want to go out getting stopped. And he did everything possible to stay on his feet again. And he was still managing to throw haymakers and overhand punches and some body shots here and there, trying to keep Benavidez off of him. He threw some valiant suppressive fire there, that he threw combinations to the body and the head, trying to keep Benavidez off of him. Landed some good punches, but Benavidez kept coming forward, and it just wore him out. And eventually, he doesn't answer the stool. The corner ends up stopping it at the end of the 6th round. He doesn't answer the bell, and the fight is stopped. Why do I mention at the beginning of this episode that he was a self-proclaimed most avoided fighter? Well, because he had not been tested like this before and had not overcome any major tests from any major top-ranked opponent or big name in his entire career. He had looked good against lesser opposition. He had outshined his opposition, outperformed his opposition, because he was a level up from those opponents that were standing across the ring from him. So, this is not, and you guys know that I do my best to stay away from negative narratives or to put anybody down, categorize anybody. You know you're never going to hear me, and you could go back and look at my catalog. You know I'm never going to be like, that dude's trash, that dude's this. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of balls, a lot of heart to step into that ring. And most of the people that will run their mouth loosely, run their mouth unafraid of consequence, free of consequence, because they've never been punched in the mouth. So no, Demetrius Andrade is not trash, but he was a self-proclaimed boogeyman in boxing, trying to land a big name fight, and he did it. He got himself a big payday against David Benavidez, but at what cost? These long layoffs, what Benavidez is doing right now, clearing out the division, leaving no room for anybody else to be in question as to who needs to be his next opponent within 1 or 2 fights, meaning Canelo. This is the same thing that Gennady Golovkin did. Fighting everybody else that nobody else was fighting, that was some semi-top ranked, cleaning out everybody else, while Canelo was fighting the bigger names and the bigger fights. So at that point, there was nobody else to choose from but him. Deverechenkos and Danny Jacobs, and they were all out. There was nobody else. So they had to fight. Including Gennady coming up to 168 to take a shot and try to dethrone Canelo in his newly crowned division, and was unsuccessful. But of course, an older Gennady, I'm just happy that that fight ended up happening, because that would have been something that haunts Canelo, that he always avoided him for that third trilogy fight or that third fight. And now the narrative is, well, he aged him out. He did. Stop it. It was a lose-lose, win-win, lose-lose type scenario. Whether he won, he was going to get criticized. If he lost, he was going to get criticized. He did what he did, and he did it to shut everybody up, and he jumped in and took the Gennady fight. Gennady coming up in weight. Nothing unfair about it. It needed to happen, and it happened. Done. That narrative is done. Now, Andrade fighting lesser opposition, outshining, looking better than them, getting these decision wins and so forth. Yes, he continued to win. He continued to win. He was undefeated walking into this fight. 32-0. 32-0. He's 32-1 now. 32-0. With 19 knockouts. But as the competition got a little bit harder for him, and let's just categorize this. If Andrade is a B-level fighter, because he's not an A-level fighter, let's just be real. And this Saturday proved it. But if he's a B-level fighter, where's Jason Quigley at? Where's Luke Keeler? These are C and D-level fighters. Brian Rose. Vanes Metarosian was in the top 10. But this is 2014, 2013 that we're talking about 9-10 years ago. So the toughest fight that he had recently, within the last few years, was Liam Williams. And that happened in 2021, spring of 21. Maciej Sulecki happened in 2019, 4 years ago. So the detriment has to be from his corner, from his matchmakers, from himself. He should not have these long layoffs. And if he's going to continue his career, which I imagine he will, he needs to fight top-level opposition. Start fighting the big names. Nobody stayed away from him. He just didn't have anything to offer because of the level of opposition that he was fighting. Now, we move on to Benavidez, who just stopped the self-proclaimed boogeyman. Guess what? He's the boogeyman. And he continues to prove it. David Benavidez has a resume now. 28-0. 3-time WBC champion, even though he's an interim champ at the moment. He lost the title due to drugs. And he lost the title on the scales. Now he got himself back in the running. And he got himself an interim title, knocking on Canelo's door now. Can he get that fight? No. Can he get that fight? No. Can he get that fight? No. Meanwhile, he continues to fight top-level opposition, and all these no's that have been happening since he got that interim title, they're fading away. Those no's are fading away because now he's just focused on himself. Continue fighting until there's no more room to either run or vacate, and he cleans out the division. So we look at his last few fights. Demetrius Andrade, 32-0. He's got a loss to Benavidez now. Caleb Plant has 2 losses now to Canelo and Benavidez. David Lemieux, who was a decent contender. David Lemieux was a decent contender back in the 160 days. Older fighter, of course. Undersized for Benavidez. Got wrecked by Benavidez. Got wrecked by Triple G. He's 43-5. David Lemieux. He's competing at 168. But he hasn't fought since that loss to David Benavidez, and that happened in May of 22. So when you look at the body of work, where do we see Demetrius go? In my opinion, he's a big body, but he looked way undersized, way smaller than Benavidez, and Benavidez is a monster. He's tall, he's lanky, a lot of reach, a lot of body mass. He's a big, big guy. He looks more like a 175-pounder, like a Callum Smith, like a Bivol, like a Zurdo Ramirez, like he belongs at 175 or up. Andrade looks like a middleweight. So, Andrade, in my opinion, needs to go back to 160. That division is up for grabs. And if Jermall Charlo does not vacate that 160, that's the fight to go for. He fights Erislandy Lara, gets a title again. That would be an awkward fight between Lara and Andrade because of their styles. It'd be a really awkward, sloppy fight, in my opinion. But it'd be an interesting one. And if he beats Lara, who's an older fighter, similar era as Demetrius Andrade. But if he beats Lara, now he has a WBA title. He goes back and gets his title that he vacated and challenges Janibek. Now he would have 3 titles, and his big money fight would be either Jermall, or if Jermall vacates and moves up to 168, because he's looking for those bigger names as well, then he could fight Adames for the WBC, and that would be a hell of a fight between Boo and Adames, Carlos Adames. I would say Andrade needs to go back to 160. For Benavidez, here we go again with the old Triple G narrative. Now it's just a new name. And Canelo and all the big fighters, the big name fighters will always say it, right? After him, who? Oh, he's avoiding Billy Joe Saunders. He doesn't want to fight BJ Saunders. He doesn't want to fight Caleb Plant. He doesn't. And it's never ending. Oh, he's avoiding Danny Jacobs. Terrence Crawford, remember a couple years ago. Canelo doesn't like to fight black fighters. These narratives are insane. And he keeps beating him. He lost to Bivol, moving up a division. He fought Zach Ryder or John Ryder in May, and he beat Charlo, who's a smaller fighter in weight, but was a taller, bigger fighter than Canelo come fight time. But the punching power is a big difference maker from what Charlo was used to at 154. And he dominated that division, right? We had number 6 versus number 7, if I remember right. Or is it number 7 and number 8? Who did we have in the 4-belt era that I'm forgetting? We had Bernard was first, Taylor second. We had Crawford third, Usyk fourth, Josh Taylor number 5, Canelo number 6, Charlo number 7. Am I correct in that? I think I got the right order. Which means number 8th right? Number 8th was Devin Haney. Number 9 was Terence Crawford once again at 147. And number 10 was Naoya Inoue. Is Naoya Inoue, or was, because he left the 118 division. Now he's unified at 122. That's another big fight that happened this year. We'll see if we could do a recap of all these. So many fights that happened this year. Benavidez is knocking on the door of Canelo, and this narrative is well underway, and all the boxing shows are talking about it. In my opinion, Canelo is already dwindling his career down. He had aspirations of moving up and winning a title in another division. Remember, he wanted to fight Macaboo for the cruiserweight title. And that fight didn't materialize. Now he could fight Badou Jack. He's the champ. Unless that title changed hands again, I would have to relook at that. But I think Badou Jack's the current champ. That fight was apparently in talks for May, and then it didn't happen because of weight issues and what have you. And then John Ryder was the mandatory for the WBO title, I believe. And so that was a big fight in Mexico. Then he beats Charlo, who dared to be great. Charlo's still the champ at 154, still the man there. And it looks like he's going to go back down and either fight Crawford, if Crawford doesn't take the rematch with Spence, or he'll fight Tim Tszyu, son of the legendary Costa Tszyu. Benavidez has one more fight, in my opinion. If Canelo doesn't happen in May, Benavidez has one more fight. Don't dive in to the 175 and start doing these big money fights. This is what you're after. You're after, in my opinion, if you're after Canelo, clean out the division. And there's one more fighter that needs to be handled, and that's David Morrell. Cuban sensation David Morrell, who's fighting out of Minneapolis. He's got a version of the WBA title to Canelo's WBA championship. He's the regular champion. Canelo's the world champion, or the super champion, as the WBA designates. That's the last fight. David Benavidez, David Morrell, early 2024. In my opinion, David Morrell's been calling for that fight. David Morrell's asking for the fight. Don't take on anybody else, in my opinion. I would tell Benavidez, do not take on anybody else. Go after David Morrell. Now you beat David Morrell, who's barely 8 or 9 fights into his professional career. He was a Cuban sensation as far as the amateurs are concerned, has come in, and you guys have heard me talk about David Morrell before. That was actually the last episode that I recorded over a year ago, before I took this long stint, this long pause. But David Morrell was PBC's version of Lomachenko, getting him into a title shot early in his career, and within 1 or 2 fights in, he became a champion and has held on to this title since, fighting subpar opposition, but the necessary opposition to build him up. He doesn't have the 32 fights that Andrade does. He's barely got 7-8 fights as a professional. He's approaching the 10 professional fight, and he's already got a title, and he's had a title with him, and he looks better and better every time out. And he's calling David Benavidez out. He's called Canelo, but he knows he doesn't have the resume to get Canelo unless he beats a big name. And the only big name right now for him to beat would be David Benavidez, who holds the interim WBC title. That's it. That's the one. You fight David Morrell early 2024. Canelo will go and do another fight, or a mandatory or another fight. Big showdown in May. I think the approach is Jaime Munguia is going to be fighting John Ryder, Canelo's last opponent. Remember, Jaime Munguia was being built up to fight Triple G, so he was fighting all of the previous Triple G opponents trying to get into that fight. And then when the opportunity was there, it never happened. And that was 2020, 2021, 2022. And it never happened. Now he's going to fight John Ryder in January, which would give him enough time if he doesn't take too much damage. And he wins that fight, which is a tough fight for Munguia based on the performance that Ryder put on against Canelo. That was a blood and guts, all heart type performance by John Ryder. He recognized the moment and he did everything possible to seize it and gave Canelo a tough fight in Mexico City. And just balls to the wall on that fight. And John Ryder looked amazing. His stock went up because of the performance that he put on against Canelo. I don't see an easy fight for Jaime Munguia. And as we get closer, we'll cover that fight. But Jaime Munguia, in a perfect world for them, for these big fights to happen, Jaime Munguia beats John Ryder, the last opponent of Canelo, or one of the previous opponents of Canelo, because Munguia is not going to fight Jermell Charlo. So his last big opponent at 168, if he dethrones him or stops him in earlier fashion or in greater fashion than Canelo did, that's a perfect setup to get a Cinco de Mayo showdown between Jaime Munguia and Canelo. Meanwhile, Benavidez fights Morrell, and we shoot to September, big Mexican Independence weekend, and Canelo against Benavidez happens. After that victory, Canelo could go off into the sunset, or if he takes another loss, Benavidez will be on top of the boxing world. Because I don't see Munguia beating Canelo, but he will give him a spirited effort, and he'll give him a spirited fight. But I don't see Munguia having a chance against Canelo. He's a great fighter. I feel that Munguia has been wronged, and you guys have heard me in past episodes. If you look at my catalog, all the fights that I've covered with Munguia, I think he's been wronged. I think he's become a better fighter, a better boxer, a higher pedigree boxer. Now that he's had Eric Morales with him for 5 or 6 fights, he's leveled up several times since Eric Morales came into his life. But they keep prepping him and prepping him and prepping him. And he's 40-some fights into his career already. Stop it already. Get him into the big names. He should have had Triple G on his resume already. He should have had Erislandy Lara and Charlo. He had the chance to fight Andrade and pulled out of that fight. Similar. He's in a similar track as Andrade, except he's been more active than Andrade. But it's a weird trajectory that they're building him up, and he's been taking damage. Meanwhile, look at the fight with Gabe Rosado. Look at his last fight that he had where it looked like he was gonna lose. Who was his last fight? It just doesn't come to mind right now. But I'll find it for you. He took some damage. Jaime Munguia. Let's see. Yep, 42-0. His fight with Deverchenko. That fight with Deverchenko was the one. That was June of this year. That's the fight where I thought he was going to lose. And I thought, actually, even though I didn't do an episode on it, I was actively watching that fight. I thought he lost that fight. That was for the 168 silver WBC title. Just to get him in line, just to get him in talks for a fight at 168. That was in Ontario, California, this past June. And yes, I remember this fight so vividly. He was the headliner, and Shane Mosley Jr. fought on that undercard against Demetrius Ballard, who was a former opponent of Jaime Munguia. That fight, I thought Deverchenko did enough to have beat Munguia, had him nearly out. He nearly had him out on his feet, but Munguia survived because he's that spirited. He's got a lot of heart. He fights with that Mexican warrior heart that people talk about. He does have that. He does possess that. But I just don't see him beating a Benavidez or beating a Canelo. But he's in exciting fights. He puts exciting shows. And if this plays out how I envision it playing out, if he's successful against John Ryder, who's going to be a stand and bang type of fight in January, he'll get himself into a main and doesn't walk away with too many injuries or too banged up. He'll be ready in time for Cinco de Mayo, fights Canelo. And then Canelo, succeeding in Cinco de Mayo, would end up facing David Benavidez. Meanwhile, David Benavidez could eliminate the last standing big name and title holder at 168, or interim title holder like himself, in David Morrell. That would be the perfect final four type setup for 168. All roads lead to Canelo. Amazing fight by David Benavidez and Andrade. More so, amazing fight by David Benavidez. Impressive victory by David Benavidez. Expected victory by David Benavidez. We just didn't know how it was going to happen because Andrade has given us too many different looks in his past fights, and chances were that it was going to go to decision with the hope of a stoppage, which we got. Congratulations, David Benavidez, the Mexican Monster, as Mike Tyson nicknamed him, and he's run off with that nickname. La Bandera Roja, putting Phoenix on his shoulders and putting the world on notice. David Benavidez is for real. He's here. He's knocking on the door of Canelo, and he's right around the corner from having the big showdown that he's been asking for so long, and that in many playbooks and pundits' opinions, he's the favorite against Canelo. Very intriguing matchup, and I think we're going to get it next year. And I think I'm laying out a perfect road to how it'll play out if it does happen to play out that way. Think about it. If John Ryder does not or ends up beating Jaime Munguia, well, that'll derail those plans. But does that mean that Canelo wouldn't have an opponent? Absolutely not. Because at that, he would get Jermall Charlo at that point, the brother, who was standing in the audience when his brother was fighting him this past September, saying he would not do this to me. And now that he fought at a catchweight, he's ready for that. And mentions keep happening. There's comments and mentions and articles that I keep seeing of something to do with the contract when he agreed to fight Jermell, that he had agreed to fight both brothers. Something to that sort. But other than that, listen, they're all with PBC now because Canelo ended up joining with PBC or signing a 3-fight contract with PBC. David Morrell's with PBC. David Benavidez is with PBC. Jaime Munguia is with Golden Boy and DAZN. Easy fight to make. If that leads, that'll be a big showdown for Cinco de Mayo. But if John Ryder spoils it, he's not going to get a rematch with Canelo, but he'll get himself into another big fight. So from there, it's just a matter of finding any other opponent for Canelo Cinco de Mayo or Jermall Charlo. At that point, Jermall would have to vacate that 160, enter the playbook for Demetrius Andrade to make his last run at having gold and potentially unifying a division at 160. But he has no business at 168. So, wow, 41 minutes. 41 minutes. Look at that. We came back, and we came back strong. And we're gonna run off with this. I'm so happy to be here, covering fights once again, talking about the sport that we all love so much. 41 minutes, and there's plenty more. We got a whole year to recap, and we're gonna end this year 2023 with a bang. Plenty more big fights, plenty more boxing to cover, and from there, we'll see if we could sneak in some MMA or some combat sport talk as well, because there's been a lot of stuff going on within MMA. I know PFL's in talks of purchasing Bellator. There's a big Perry Eddie Alvarez fight going on, happening in BKFC, as Perry has become. Platinum Perry has become the man in BKFC, and he beat Luke Rockhold earlier this year. A lot of stuff to cover, but boxing, of course, is always center stage, at least for us, and plenty to go, plenty to run off with. So I'm happy to be back, and please stay tuned. And I appreciate your clicks, your downloads. Don't forget to share. Don't forget to talk to your people, talk to your friends, and let's see if you pose this narrative to your friends, to your colleagues, to your family members, as to the layout that I'm seeing here between Canelo and Benavidez, how we could lead and make it happen next September, and what the ideal path would be for each of them to make it there for this big showdown that we all want to see, right? So I thank you guys again for tuning in. This is the Toma Todito Boxing Show, your show. I'm Hecali. Peace out.